Good day. We are the Group 4 and we are here to discuss the border dispute between Israel and Palestine. First, we will discuss the historical reasons behind the conflict. Second, issues behind the conflict in West Bank and Gaza Strip. Third, what are the major steps undertaken by Israel and Palestine towards peace? Lastly, the current status of the conflict between Israel and Palestine.
The primary causes of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict involved a dispute over the land that the Jews call Israel and the Palestinians call Palestine. Both groups believe that they have a God-given right to that territory, with both sides claiming rights based on the pact God made with Abraham in the Bible's Old Testament. In fact, both opponents were once part of the same group of people who inhabited what was considered the Promised Land. Some believe that the original conflict began because the Jews were exiled from the area in ancient times when it was conquered by the Romans. Later, it was taken over again by the Arabs, who can still be found there today. The Jews created a movement in which they would relocate to the land they felt was given to them by God, based on the accounts in the Bible. This occurred with little regard to the Palestinian population that was already residing there. Disputes over who had rights to the land followed. Great Britain had control over the Palestinian land and granted the Jews permission to emigrate, but this was revoked as riots from the Arab people became increasingly violent and hostile. When the Holocaust occurred and more than 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis in Germany, Poland, and other areas in Europe, Great Britain was petitioned to allow the Jewish people to begin migrating into Palestine once again. This period was when the Israeli-Palestinian conflict escalated into the nearly constant fighting of the day. The Jewish people once again began taking over parts of the Palestinian territory and established what is now Israel. This led to war breaking out in the years 1956, 1967, 1973, and 1982. Since that time, there have been various terrorist attacks and battles over areas of land within the region, especially the Gaza Strip. Since Israel became a nation in 1948, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been relocated as refugees in various locations in the Middle East. Palestinians have used violent force during the course of the conflict in an attempt to overtake the Jews, reclaim the territory, and allow the refugees to return to their former land. Although terrorist groups are responsible for many of the attacks against Israel, most Arabs there live in poverty and poor living conditions. There have been a number of peace treaties that both sides tried to implement, but none have withstood the test of time in maintaining peace in the region. This is due in part to repeated terrorist attacks and continued pushes for more lands by both sides.
The conflict is rooted in Jewish and Arab claims to the same land in the Palestine region, which was under British control under 1917 and 1947. The Gaza Strip is a tiny piece of territory along the eastern Mediterranean Sea and adjacent to Egypt. After the nation of Israel was established and boundaries were determined by the United Nations in 1947, the Gaza Strip, bounded on two sides by the new Israel, came under Egyptian control. The Arab-Israeli region was the site of Arab uprising known as Intifada. The historic accord between the Palestine Liberation Organization and Israel, signed in May 1994, provided for Palestinian self-rule in Gaza Strip. West Bank, which does not neighbor the Gaza Strip, is an area on the east of Israel along the Jordan River and Dead Sea. The West Bank includes the towns of Jericho, Bethlehem, and Hebron. The holy city of Jerusalem is situated on the shared border between Israel and West Bank. By the UN mandate, the established the independent Jewish state of Israel in 1948, the West Bank area was supposed to become Palestinian, but Arabs who were unhappy with the UN agreement in the first place attacked Israel, and Israel responded by occupying the West Bank. A 1950 truce brought the West Bank under the control of neighboring Jordan. This situation lasted until 1967 when Israeli forces again occupied the region. Israelis soon began establishing settlements there, which provoked the resentment of Arabs. The Intifada uprising that began in Gaza Strip in 1987 soon spread to the West Bank. In 1988, Jordan relinquished its claim to the area, but fighting between the PLO and Israeli troops continued. Peace talks began in 1991, and the agreements that provided the Palestinian self-rule in Gaza Strip also provided the gradual return of West Bank lands to Palestinians. The city of Jericho was the first of these lands.
The first step toward this kind of understanding is for Israelis not to take Hamas rhetoric, as troubling as it often is, too seriously. The group's members may still harbor a deep desire to destroy the Jewish state, but their leaders have no rational incentive to initiate a conflict with Israel on a scale that would result in the destruction of Hamas and its infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. With Iran likely developing a nuclear weapon, Egypt now being governed by avowed friends of Hamas, and the civil war in Syria spilling over into Israel, it is perfectly natural for Israelis to feel that they are surrounded by enemies and have no choice but to use preventive force if they are to survive. But Jerusalem must accept the simple truth that many of these events are beyond its control, and that in many cases, Israeli intervention will only make a bad situation worse. Instead, Israel should concentrate on defensive measures such as strengthening its Iron Dome missile defense system. For their part, the leaders of Hamas must realize that they do themselves and their fellow Palestinians no favors when they dare Israel to escalate its military strikes in Gaza. Now that they are governing a territory, they are responsible for the welfare of that territory's population. Thus, a strategy of firing missiles at Israeli civilians in order to provoke a disproportionate Israeli response is both unwise and immoral, no matter how much international support the Palestinians might gain by it. Outside actors, particularly Egypt, can play important roles in maintaining such a cold peace. Though neither side will openly acknowledge it, Egypt is already a crucial intermediary in back-channel negotiations between the warring parties. As such, its Muslim Brotherhood government could emerge as the internationally acknowledged arbiter that prevents the parties from escalating their fighting, provided the Brotherhood first makes absolutely clear that whatever its sympathies for Hamas may be, it will maintain the Egypt-Israel peace treaty. Cracking down on the flow of weapons into Gaza via the Sinai Peninsula is one measure Egypt can take to help Israelis to feel secure that the Brotherhood is committed to playing the role of neutral arbiter rather than siding unconditionally with Hamas. The United States can also support this process by helping Israel improve its defensive weapons system and by coordinating American-Israeli nuclear strategies so that the two states will be on the same page in dealing with the nuclear-armed Iran. It will also be important, as long as the Egypt-Israel treaty is maintained, for Washington to stay fully engaged with any elected government in Cairo, whether its foreign policy fully aligns with U.S. goals or not. None of this means that the status quo of the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict is sustainable over the long term. The failure of the Israeli government to permanently halt the construction of settlements in the West Bank, combined with the failure of the most Middle Eastern regimes to engage with Israel, makes reaching a two-state solution extremely difficult. But a minimum of a partial peace between Israel and Hamas is vital if such a solution is to be achieved. As long as violence between the two sides proceeds, the attention of the world cannot be focused as closely on the goal of a broader peace.
Death tolls from Israel's major air and ground operation in Gaza nearly 4 years ago remain disputed. A United Nations report in 2009 summarized the findings, which included a death toll ranging from 1,166 counted by the Israeli government to 1,444 counted by Gaza authorities, which figures from non-governmental organizations in between, though closer to the Gaza count. There was wider disagreement over the number of casualties who were civilians. The European Union is reportedly formulating a detailed peace plan to re-energize dormant Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. According to Israeli diplomatic sources, the goal of the EU plan is to bring about the establishment of an independent Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders, with its capital in East Jerusalem. The report said the EU tends to set a clear timetable for negotiations between the two sides in 2013. At a meeting last week in Amman of the Middle East Quartet, which consists of US, UN, the EU, and Russia, the EU reportedly wanted to begin deciding on the parameters of the new peace proposal, but US representatives said that they should wait until after the Obama inauguration on January 21 and the Israeli general elections the following day. Israeli sources received reports that the EU would like to use the plan as the basis for the regional discussions, which would include the participation of Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf states. President Obama plans to travel to Israel this spring for the first time since taking office, as he and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu try to move past the friction of the last 4 years now that both have won re-election. The relationship between the two leaders has been edgy for years over issues like Israel's settlements in West Bank and ways to stop Iran's nuclear program. Mr. Obama is not expected to unveil concrete proposals for bringing Israelis and Palestinians together during his visit or initiate a specific new peace process.